God says, be reconciled to God for our sake. He made him to be sin who knew no sin, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. Do you want to become the righteousness of God? Do you want to represent God and Christ in the world? Do you want to be an ambassador for Christ? You can only do that if you put God as the focus and remain clear that the context is not simply your relationship with God, but God's relationship with you in community. And when you put the focus on God in the context of community that is family, you have to begin to act differently than people in the world. God is making his appeal through us. I know that you've heard it before. I've heard some of you say it. Sometimes, for some people, the only Bible they read is us. So here's the question. What do people think about God when they read us? Do they see the love of God, the mercy of God, the compassion of God? Do they see one who is committed to reconciliation, to taking the first step to make things better? Or do they see someone who continues to see the world from a human point of view and says, well, I might be willing to work on some reconciliation if they just do this, if they just do that, if they make the first move, if they apologize to me? Do we give a picture to the world of those who want to do things God's way and do God's will when they're convenient and they meet our agenda, but conveniently let God's way and God's will go when it doesn't meet our agenda? How many people do you know who've said to you personally, you know, the church is just like any other organization, the politics is just ridiculous? I've heard it. I had a nice conversation just this past week. I was walking my dog in the park. Somebody else was walking their dog in the park, and you know how dogs are, you know, if they're friendly, they like to say hello, and then their owners say hello, and you start talking. And while we were talking, three Jehovah's Witnesses came to witness both of us. And in the ensuing conversation, then, you know, there was some interesting back and forth. And then finally, I extricated myself. And I went on, and a little bit later, this young woman, she was a young woman, extricated herself, and we ran into each other on the other side of the park after we weren't confronted with the Jehovah's Witnesses anymore. And she began to talk to me about that experience and how, you know, quite frankly, you know, she has faith. She's a spiritual person, but she doesn't go to church. Now, mind you, I haven't told her yet that I'm a pastor. Because if I had, we wouldn't be having a conversation. So I'm listening and I'm nodding my head and I'm saying, I can understand why that's troublesome to you. And in the end, of course, she's saying what so many people say today. You know, the church isn't any different than any other group. And unfortunately, in too many places, the church isn't any different. It should be. And that's part of the reason we need to not just pray the Lord's Prayer, but live the Lord's Prayer. That's part of the reason we need to do things in a way that when people look from the outside, they say, oh, that's what the church is supposed to be like? I might be interested in that. What's really interesting is how many conversations I have with regular people who really want a place where the church is the church. And they've been disappointed again and again. A lot of younger people are like, well, you know, I have deep, deep faith, but the church doesn't help with that. It hurts. So the question for us is, how do we take up this ministry of reconciliation and make it the center of our life together so that we represent Christ accurately? You see, Christ is the one who got in trouble with so many religious regulars, Pharisees, Sadducees, because he was more concerned about people than about rules and regulations. He healed on the Sabbath when the rules of his day said, oh, the Sabbath you don't do anything except worship God. He didn't seem to understand how healing people wasn't worshiping God. He got in trouble because he didn't shy away from the street people. And yet we live in a world where if an upstanding member of the church, if a pastor is seen hanging out with certain kinds of people, rumors start. Right? Oh, you think the pastor's really witnessing to that woman? I doubt it. Why? Because we're regarding each other from a human point of view. From God's point of view, every person is potentially someone that can become a part of the family. You know, I grew up in West Virginia, in Appalachia. And I don't know how much you know about that culture. But in that culture, I think, and from what I've heard in some conversations, it's somewhat like Indian culture, in that a lot of times family is a very loose term. And some people were brought up by someone who was never even there, you know, legally related to them. But they became family, right? Someone taken in because, their parents had a nasty divorce and one of them started drinking and the other one just disappeared. Someone who becomes a member of the family because their parents died and nobody could find any relatives. And so it's like, well, they can live with us. We got room for one more. Cousins, become brothers. And in fact, I think somebody told me that that cousin-brother differentiation isn't even part of the way that Indians talk, I believe. Am I right about that? One of the things that gets me confused about who's related to who sometimes. So, in some contexts, we already know how to practice this. And yet we don't do it consistently. And we don't do it intentionally as the church. If we want to live the Lord's Prayer and not just say the Lord's Prayer, we've really got to start practicing this ministry of reconciliation. We've really got to start being the ones who take the first step instead of waiting for the other to take the first step. We've got to stop keeping track of someone's failures and instead encourage them to let the past be the past and move into God's future. We've got to understand that ultimately, anyone's acceptance is not up to us, it's up to God. And if God is in control, I want to remind you of a verse you all know well. God so loved the world. The world! Not just parts of the world. Not just those who were relatively successful in life, middle class or above. Not just those who already have given some kind of allegiance to God. But God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son.